Like, what is this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I was sitting there in the cubicle one day, and the only thing that I could think about that was positive was like, oh, I get to get home and I get to drink, and then I get to do some cocaine, and that's awesome. Like, that's my bliss for the day. And then I was like, dude, what are you doing? You're John the wrestler, but what does that really mean? You know, there's so many different things that come off of John the wrestler. That means you're dedicated. That means you're loyal to your craft. That means that you face adversity and you go through that to achieve what that main goal is. And so when I started to really unpack all of those things of, okay, John the wrestler is all of those things that came with being a wrestler. And as I started to get closer to God, the calling of helping other people achieve that John the wrestler mentality was really the light bulb moment.
Yeah. So we always like to start off the podcast with a would you rather question, right? And it's always ugly, either option, because that's life. We need to embrace it and be okay with it. So today your question is not about dedication, because no matter what, you still have to do this activity. This is a matter of you weren't disciplined. So your first option is you're in bodybuilding, okay? And you have to get on stage for your show, and you weren't disciplined enough, and so you only got down to about 5.5% body fat. So if you know anything about bodybuilding, that's not low enough for getting on stage. But you still have to get on stage, so you're gonna get up there, you're gonna do your poses, you're gonna be next to Mr. 3%ers, and you should have to take it because you know what, you are a dedicated person. Your other option for failure is you're a power lifter. Same thing. You weren't dedicated enough, so you didn't lose enough weight. So now you have to go in the next weight class up, and you just get smoked because you're nowhere near strong enough to compete with that heavy of a person. You end up taking dead last. Which one are you choosing and why?
I think the second option, mainly because if I fail doing something with a group of people where they're above me, I know that I'm going to, as a byproduct, naturally rise to that level. And so if I am in a group of people where it's a higher weight class, there's a higher goal that needs to be achieved, my subconscious mind will pick up on that and will subconsciously try harder, which makes me feel more fulfilled.
Okay. What if you had to get on stage on the other one? How would you feel?
If I had to get on stage?
Yeah, you're at 5.5% and you had to. So they're like, you know what?
I think there's an element of giving your all, regardless of with what you have at that point in time, and just knowing that you can step on a stage, even if it's not the ideal weight or body fat percentage that I want it to be. I think that I will naturally be okay with myself in that moment if I don't overthink on those things, because that's happened a lot actually in my life. There's been wrestling matches where I didn't cut weight right, and I waited till the last 3 days to go and cut the weight. And when it was time to compete, my energy was drained. So I was like, okay, if I know I'm not my best, how can I still be fulfilled in knowing that I can still do my best? Is just eliminating that thought whatsoever of, okay, I'm not my best. Well, what do I have, and what can I take advantage of what I currently have right now?
Nice. Yeah, I definitely would have to pick the lifting one. Mainly, if I'm going to be completely transparent, so I did bodybuilding, and I only did it because I have such issues with body image. I was like, you know what? If you get shredded, you're good, right? And so it would be an absolute nightmare to go on stage at 5.5%. I think I would be really uncomfortable. Even though it's a great weight and you still look good, my own insecurities wouldn't let me do it. I'd be like, nope, Devin, nope, let's just go lift heavy and fail. But so y'all are on the Do You Even Fail podcast. We're here with John today. Super excited. This is the third one in a row that we're still in Texas. They're nice enough. They let me stick around. Don't know why. But John, give the audience a little bit of a flyover of who you are. Who makes John John?
Yeah, John is an imperfect person serving a perfect God. And in a nutshell, through my mission of impacting as many lives as possible, I am a person that is constantly striving to be the best version of myself through failure. And so it's one thing that I really think of every single day of how can I fail in this day, which ultimately shows me who I truly am and how I can ultimately impact the world in a positive way through my online fitness and coaching, online fitness and mindset coaching services. So that's John.
Nice. So you said you seek every day on how you can fail. Did I articulate that properly?
100%.
Okay. So the question for you, do you think you have to earn the right to fail?
That's a loaded question. I think, no, I don't think you have to earn the right to fail. I think you have to earn the right to be okay with failing. Um, and I think that is achieved through constant failure. A lot of people get scared of failure, and so they stay stagnant in their lives for, a very long time, if not forever. And the reason why is because of that fear that comes out of failure. So I think that you have to earn the acceptance of that through failing countless times.
Yeah. I was thinking about it when I was driving. I drove down from Dallas. I was up in Dallas earlier today. And I can't help but think, I was like, you know what? I think failure is something you earn. I think it shouldn't be something you like purposely, just want to eat dirt every second of your life. But if you aren't taking risks, like you said, if you aren't seeking the opportunity, you won't fail, right? Like you could say, well, it's a failure to stay in one state your entire life, right? Not literally a state, but a mind,
Yeah.
a place of being. So I would say failure is something that you earn through trying and growing and pushing yourself. And I would say if people haven't felt like they've earned it lately, that'd be a good place to start, is like, hey, where can I challenge myself?
Where can I fail?
Yeah.
Right. I think one thing that I always think about is, where do I want to fail and why? Why do I want to fail in this? And I think that the more real I am about why I want to fail, the clarity I have about the thing I'm doing. So, for example, if I'm really trying to get into public speaking, I know the quicker I fail in those public speaking opportunities, the faster the learning curve is going to be. So, the more I can do that, the more I'm stepping into being okay with the failure. And it's never easy, right? It's a big ego thing. Failure is a hard thing to accept, but I think that the more you actually step into it, the more you're okay with it, because you know that it's the signal of progress.
So you said something interesting. You said you wanted to know why you wanted to fail. Do you think you can seek failure for a wrong reason?
100%. I used to seek failure for a wrong reason. One thing that I used to seek failure for was to get attention. And that boils down to a lot of insecurities that I had from my upbringing. The more attention that I had, the more secure I felt in myself. And so I was seeking failure to get attention in a weird way. And so I think that you really have to understand why you're trying to fail. What's the main reason? Is it ego driven? Is there a subconscious thing that you're not really aware of? And I really never really understood that until I started to talk to a therapist and understand, like, why have I sought out failure in all these categories of my life? And it boiled down to, well, you wanted to be seen. You weren't ever seen as a kid. And so having that in my mind, I now naturally check myself for when I'm seeking failure. Is like, okay, is this ego? Is this truly out of learning to grow in a certain area?
Can you give me an example of where you chose to fail for attention?
Yeah. So I used to fail in wrestling all the time for attention. So I would go in, for example, St. Cloud State is the best wrestling room you can go in D2 sports, or for D2 wrestling. And I went to fail there because I knew that I was going to get my ass beat every single day. I knew it was going to make me a better wrestler, but me going to that school and failing by wrestling all of these top-notch dudes was getting me more attention from my parents, which is what I subconsciously wanted. So failing in a non-purpose-driven way, that would be a huge example of it.
So would you say, do you think you ever, let's back up. If it wasn't for your parents giving you attention in wrestling, would have you wrestled at all?
You know what's wild? I don't think I would have. After I realized that it was an escape for me, that is what kept me in the sport of wrestling. I was never doing it for the right reason, which is why I never won a national title. And after years of being out of the sport, I now know that because the people that win the national titles, they're doing it for a different reason. I was not doing it for the right reason. But what I grew to love was the separation from reality that I got. So I fell in love with that aspect of it more than the actual reason of winning a national title.
What do you think you would have done if it wasn't wrestling? Because I mean, obviously you're really good. If you're a D2 wrestler and you could go to state, obviously you had natural raw talent as well as great work ethic. So where do you think you'd repurpose that?
Man, I think when I think about it, growing up, I played so many different sports. My parents put me into sports when I was 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old. So I had played sports for as long as I can remember. So I know that naturally I wanted to do that. So it would have been something that tested my limits. And the reason why is because I had a rough upbringing and I was always being tested. So subconsciously, I was driven towards the things that were tough, which wrestling is a very tough thing. My dad wrestled in college, and so watching his wrestling tapes, it kind of inspired me to want to go try that thing because it was hard. And then when I actually got into the nitty-gritty of it, I was like, wow, this is really freaking difficult. So I would say something that's hard. I mean, Ironmans, dude, like that's one of the things that always stands out to me. Definitely something that I'm going to pursue in the future, just because it's scary for one, and for two, I know it's very, very difficult. So I think anything that has to do with like running or breaking the body down, I would have naturally been pulled towards.
So I got to ask, most wrestlers I know aren't very good swimmers. I mean, how's that part going to go over? Are we looking at,
I was
lifeguard following you? Or?
That's funny you say that. I'm actually a pretty decent swimmer. So swimming was one sport as a kid that I really loved. So I'm actually not a terrible swimmer. That's actually the one part of an Ironman that I'm not really worried about, to be completely honest. The running, it terrifies me because I have 2 bum knees from wrestling. So the brute force on the running is difficult for me. I've never really ridden a bike, so that kind of scares me a little bit. But the swimming, I'm honestly pretty confident in that aspect of things.
Nice.
You probably weren't expecting.
No, I was not, to be honest. So in high school, I wrestled up until high school, and then I actually went into swimming. So I flipped it. And a bunch of my buddies I knew in wrestling, I'd always josh them, be like, "Hey, come in the pool. Well, I'll save you." And they're like, "Oh, go on the mat." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." Like, it's the reason I got out. So obviously, you gave me a little bit of your background. You went to St. Cloud State, then you went back to Colorado. Now you're in Austin. You've shared a little bit before we got on air about some of the changes you went through right out of college. You already mentioned kind of a rough upbringing. Where do we want to start in your story and the failures that really shaped who you are?
Yeah, man, I think we can really start with this identity that I created from the sport of wrestling. It became who I was. And so that was my entire identity. And then when I quit wrestling after my senior year, I had a very big identity crisis. I didn't know who I was without the sport of wrestling. And so having alcoholism in my bloodline, my biological father that he ultimately left my life at 8 years old, he had an upbringing of alcoholism. And I think that was the first thing that I turned to. It was the first thing that I turned to in that identity crisis, because it drowned the pain out of not really knowing who I was. And so the more I drank, the more bad things happen. And then I splashed in some cocaine usage, or a lot of cocaine usage with that, and ultimately created this new identity as like this partier, super fun guy, which wasn't who I was. I mean, yes, I'm a fun guy, but the partier aspect of me is not who I was. And so that can only go so far until shit starts trickling to the top. Relationships were shitting the bed. I had friends that were, looking at me in a certain light that I didn't necessarily like. And so those friendships were diminishing. And then, there was one day where I had come off a bender, a weekend bender. It was like, and I was drinking on Sunday. I was living in the basement of my parents' house, and they were worried about me because I was never really home. They knew I was kind of battling with some alcoholism issues and that I had a past of doing some drugs. And so they were kind of a little worried about that aspect of things. And there was one day where It was a Sunday. I got super blacked out, was doing cocaine, ended up calling my mom at like 3 a.m. It was, I guess, Monday morning, Sunday night, Monday morning, 3 a.m. I don't remember the conversation, but essentially she said, you didn't know what you were saying. You were acting belligerent. You came home. There was blood all over you. And in that moment, my parents came up to me in that basement and they were like, dude, like we got to send you to rehab, or like you got to figure something out here because we are truly worried about you. And I think that I was avoiding that conversation for so long, but hearing it from somebody and two people that love you the most, it really made me go inside of like, okay, what have I gotten to here? This is not who I am, and I need to pull myself out of this, or I'm going to either end up in jail or dead. And so I had that conversation with myself, and in that split second, I was like, I need to change. I need to hire a therapist. I need to figure out why I'm doing all of these things to numb something. I'm clearly numbing something here. I don't know what it is because I've been numbing it for so long that it's out the window. I don't know what it is. So I got a therapist. I started doing cognitive therapy every single week, doing the work, which was very fucking difficult because hearing things and saying things that are so deep down inside of you about why you've gotten to a certain place is very, very hard. And so there was a lot of relationship issues with my mom that I needed to sort out. And there was built up resentment that I didn't realize I had towards my biological father that I hadn't seen. So all of those things, man. And I think that what I needed was a community of people that were in a place I wanted to be. And that's what brought me to Austin.
So how many people do you think are living a similar experience as you with your alcohol and drugs, but a different substance?
Man, you know what that just brings to mind is social media. There are people, and I think it's easy for society to get caught up in this, especially right now, as social media is that drug. And I have to check myself with this as well, because one of my deep-rooted insecurities is feeling worthy. And so having that as a drug of worthiness for all of these other people to like and post and comment on all of my stuff, you naturally get a dopamine kick from that. So that can be a drug in itself. And so I think a lot of people are using that as a drug in a certain lens as well. And so it's relationship, man. I think that you have to go internal and really think, what is the relationship I have with whatever substance or thing that is, and what's my intention behind doing that thing. And same with alcohol, man. Like, I'll go to a networking event and I'll have a beer. Totally fine. What's my relationship with that? Am I having a beer to relieve some of the anxieties of being at a networking event? Or am I holding a beer to not feel awkward? Or am I holding a beer to release some emotion? Like, what is the real relationship with having that one beer? Is that one beer going to lead to 10? So I think that we just need to realize whatever that thing is, what's the relationship you have with it, and be very, very dialed in with that relationship. Because if you're not dialed in with it, it can go off the rails in a heartbeat.
What's your relationship with it?
Right now?
Yeah.
Right now, I've kind of separated myself from it. I'll have a beer at a networking event once a month, probably. So I think that stepping into 75 hard here this next week is going to be a big, it's always an eye opener for me. I've done 75 hard 3 times, and every time throughout that program, I get a different relationship with it, with alcohol specifically. And so I think that opening my eyes again to that program and really just honing in on my relationship with alcohol then just allows me to have a better relationship with it down the road. So I have a good relationship with it. It's monitored, very highly monitored, making sure that it is 1 beer. It's not 2, because 2 is the limit where I'm like, okay, now I want 3, and then I want 10. And so it's that 1 drink, which I have a good relationship with. And after that, I know that I can't have any more.
Yeah. So I want to like the phrasing of how you call it, a relationship with it, because I think everything we engage with it, we have some sort of emotional tie to it, whether we want to admit it or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's social media or why we work hard or why we go to the gym or why we enjoy a good cheeseburger, there's something there. What I'd be curious on, from point of I'm in Colorado, my life is shit. I realize it is. I started therapy. I'm getting better. I moved to Austin. How fast did that occur?
From starting therapy to getting to Austin, it took a solid year and a half. Um, it was a lot of hard work, though. There's some people that, and I thought about giving myself excuses like, I can go once a month to therapy. I can go once a month. But it's like, how fast do I want to get better? How much work? And that's something that I've always had, is like, the more work I put in, the faster I'm going to get the result. And so when I thought about this, like, if I'm going to therapy, I'm freaking doing this. Like, I'm getting all of it out right now. Like, I'm doing this every single week. And so it was about a year and a half of rediscovering myself, to then coming to the awareness of making and building a business and what that looked like, and being in a community of people that were also doing the same thing. If I would have never gone to that first therapy session, I would have never built a business. I would have not had the confidence. Who knows what would have happened. But it was in that year and a half of rediscovering myself through all of these things that pulled me to Austin, because I knew that there was a community here of people doing the exact same thing.
So something I'd be interested on. I think a lot of people find themselves in similar shoes. I've been there. A lot of my friends have, whether it's in your 20s or your 30s, where you wake up, you know you need to make a shift. You start making a shift, and sometimes a point comes to where you want to move as part of that shift, right? And some people say, hey, don't move because you're running from what you need to face. And other people say, hey, sometimes you need to move to complete the process. What would be your take on those two?
The second one, because I've lived it, and I know that for myself, and other people may think differently, but for myself, I know that being in this new environment has allowed me to step into a new identity for myself. If I was in Denver hanging around the same people that I was hanging around, doing all of those same things that I was doing, even if I wasn't doing it, I would still not feel like I'm stepping into this new identity that I've created for myself, which is the identity of self-mastery. And so I think that it's been a huge catalyst for me being in a new environment. And honestly, I think that I'm going to find myself going into new environments every few years for that specific reason, because every year I'm going to be a new and better person than I was the year before. And if being in a new environment forces me to be uncomfortable to step into that new identity, then I think that that's going to be something that I foresee myself doing for a very long time, if not forever.
So I'd be curious, do you think there is anything biblical in that? Because I know for me, I was talking to a couple Christian buddies, and we talk about how I think if I'm not going to articulate it the best, so someone listening to Christian, I'd be like, yo, bro, did you literally just compare yourself to Jesus? I'm like, I guess I did. But you know where Jesus goes, he can't be a prophet in his own backyard, right? And I think there's a lot to be taken out of that parable of, hey, in reality, what he's talking about is people saw him as who he was before he was officially announced by God that this is my son, right? And until that point, they're like, we can't see the new you. So I think that is something as humans, but especially as children of God, that we can apply to our own lives. I'd be curious your take on that.
I think there's a knowing inside for myself. It's my communication with God. And I think that we all know what the right answer for ourself is. But for myself, I needed to surrender what the outcome was to God. And by surrendering that outcome to God, I was now getting more messages of what the right thing to do was. And I think that when I moved here, that was a knowing, that conversation with God, that I didn't know what was going to happen, what the outcome was going to be of coming here. But I knew that there was a message inside of myself saying, you need to do this because of what's on the other side of this is greater than you even know and can comprehend. And so having that surrender of, okay, giving it to God, I'm just going to allow you to work through me, and I'm going to take your messages that I'm receiving, and I'm just going to do it. So I think that we all have a knowing inside, whether it's God or the universe telling you to do it. We just have to take advantage of it. And I think that the more we can have that understanding within ourselves, the more we can surrender to the outcome, and the more that Jesus moves in our life.
Yeah. So what would you say is the biggest failure you recently experienced?
like I fail every day. Biggest, define biggest.
It is the freshest failure to you right now. So it doesn't need to be like catastrophic, whole
Yeah.
world fell apart. But
Yeah.
to you, to John, that hurt. That wasn't fun.
Yeah, I would say getting fired from my corporate job was a huge failure in my eyes. And I know the reasons why, but it was something that, society, and I knew that my parents weren't necessarily going to be happy with. But it also was the propeller to diving all in on my business. If I would have never gotten fired, I would have been in the golden handcuffs for as long as, whoever knows. And so I would say that that's a failure, but it's crazy when we talk about failure because I always think of it as a positive thing. It's always just how you reframe the failure. Because if I never would have gotten fired from that corporate job, I would have never fully fledged in on my business to ultimately create more impact for people. So I would say getting fired from my corporate job has been the most recent biggest failure in my life.
So was that pre or post New John when you got fired?
That was post New John.
Okay, so why'd you get fired? John,
I was given, my energy and effort wasn't in the business. I was giving more of my time, effort, and energy to my own business, which was pulling from that business. And selfishly, I didn't really care enough, obviously, to take the backlashings of what they were telling me I needed to fix. And I think subconsciously, I knew what the outcome was going to be. I didn't have enough confidence to quit. So me creating a situation where I got fired was like my easy way of saying like, okay, now I don't have it anymore. Like it's a lot harder to go and quit than for them to fire me. And so that's what I was subconsciously thinking about. I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to give much effort into this and I'm going to ride it for as long as I can until they kind of cut me off, because that was the easier route. And I think that in itself is a failure for me. Me not being man enough to go and say, hey, I quit and I'm not going to do this anymore. So that's a failure within a failure. So I think that's really the biggest one.
So what would you tell, so I was recently at a podcast, it was a couple weeks ago, we were talking about people they believe in their job more than they believe in themselves, right? And so that's kind of what you're talking about where, hey, I have more faith that this company's always going to take care of me in this role than I do, and I'm good enough to be able to get another role, right? Or get another position. So I would assume in your position, when you're working with entrepreneurs and owners and you're tying fitness and mental, how do you talk them through that process? Because there's got to be moments where they're like, hey, I'm wrestling this.
So I think we all have different levels of confidence. I know we all have different levels of confidence. My confidence came from the sport of wrestling. In that sport, it is mano-a-mano. You're in a singlet, you're cutting weight, you're exposed. You can't blame the loss on somebody that missed a block. It's all on you. And so that confidence comes out in everything that I do. And so when I was in an environment in corporate America where it was easy to blame this work on that person and it wasn't all on me, that wasn't me being my full true John. And so people that are battling, and what was the question again? If people are
when people are battling the having enough faith in yourself over, the job to take a leap or take the next step.
I think that you start small. You start with things that every single day you're proud of doing. Self-confidence is built off of holding the small promises to yourself. One of the small promises for myself, and it's small. It's like, hey, if I walk by a piece of trash on the side of the street, I'm going to pick it up and throw it away. Those little things every single day compound and ultimately open your eyes into other ways you can have confidence, which then push you into the thing that you're actually trying to do long term. And so the more little promises we can hold to ourselves, the more confidence you're going to build over time, which allows you to then step into that true potential of whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's kind of building on the concept of you see what you're seeking, right? So if you want more confidence, then you need to seek not your insecurities in it, but what is your 1% of strength you can have in that moment.
Totally.
So when we talk about strength, when we talk about where you were to where you are, I have to assume there's party that sometimes misses the partying and the hanging out with all the people and the good times. Walk me through the mindset of John when he thinks about that.
All the time. All the time. The confidence that I get from doing the things that give me fulfillment is what I use as the fuel to not go back to that lifestyle. And what I mean by that is if it's a Friday night and I get invited to go out to the bars, and maybe it's a guy that's in town that I haven't seen in 5 years, so he doesn't know the new John, he knows the old John. And I think about, that would be fun to go just, get hammered and chill with guys and, shoot the shit and do all that. And then I think for a split second, how much better would it feel if you went and sat in your sauna, read a book, worked on your business planning for this next week, and did the things that actually fulfilled you? And then I use that experience of what the feeling is from doing that. And then I use the experience of the feeling from the other thing. And I literally compare them in my mind. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be hungover. I'm going to feel like shit about myself. I'm not going to have the energy that I have right now to actually put into my business. So my business is going to kind of get a brunt end of it. My girlfriend's probably not going to like this either. So all of these things, and I start to list out all of those reasons of why I don't want to do that versus the reasons I do want to do it. And the list is a lot longer of the reasons why not to do it than to do it. And so that's what I do when I think about those things, because it happens all the time. It's a constant battle with myself every single day.
Yeah, I would say it's even for me. I mean, I'm looking back on, well, last year was a year of I experienced some very fun things because I was hanging around all the rich people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even it was over almost 10 years ago now when I was in college last, and right out of college, living that life, and people ask me the same thing, and I'm like, heck yeah, I miss it. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I do. Like, it was fun. Like, don't get me wrong, but the repercussions, the ripple effect wasn't worth it. I think you hit on something really important though. You have something worth not doing it for. And I think a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people just have the job they hate the next day. And that's almost goes back to take that 1%. What's the one thing you're going to do? Or what's one thing you can go, hey, I'll do this tomorrow to make it worth not doing this tonight, right?
Totally. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. They don't know what fills them up. That is one of the biggest things that I preach to all of my clients, business owners that are running multi-7-figure agencies and businesses. And one of the biggest things I talk to them about is what makes you happy? And a lot of the times they can't answer that. It's like, well, I'm doing this project in my business and this is about to launch and this campaign's launching here. No, what makes you happy? Well, I hang out with my kids. All right, amazing. So that is one thing that you can build fulfillment around and now start to inject that happiness into your life. And I think that a lot of the times, if we're in a corporate America job that we hate, we already know what the next day is going to bring. And so it's easy to get wrapped up in that. And I always like to use the expression of, if when you're a kid and you're about to go on a field trip, and the night before, that emotion and that feeling that is like excitement, and you don't know what's going to happen the next day. And it's a field trip, right? So you don't really know what that day is going to bring and all of those things. I like to preach on the fact that if you can create that feeling for your life right now, you're doing something right. You want to be excited about your life. But a lot of the times there's fear that over controls that, so people never actually put themselves in a position to feel that excitement of what's going to happen tomorrow. Like, even for myself, like if I'm trying to create opportunities to go speak, I have to talk to a lot of people. And then when I finally talk to someone where they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you on board to speak to 150 entrepreneurs, that day before, I'm like, oh man, like what's going to happen? How is this going to go? It's that excitement, that feeling of like, okay, like give it to God, like let him work. And I think people just need to find that thing that gives them that feeling of when you were a kid the day before a field trip.
Why do you think people lose that?
They get numbed by the current reality that they're living in. So they haven't had the ability to feel that in so long that it is now their norm. So thinking of doing something like that doesn't cross their mind. And so when you start with the foundation, which is why I built my business off of, okay, what do I love to do and how can I teach people to do that? Because if you don't know what you love to do, then you're never going to get that feeling inside. And so I would say start small. Ask yourselves. I always say this, lead with curiosity. Don't label all of these feelings and things as bad. Just lead with curiosity and say, what is this telling me about where I'm currently at? And then take that as a learning example to then go do something different so you can start to feel that. And it's a lot of trial and error too. You know, you may not know what you like, but if you try 150 things, you're going to know a lot more that what you like compared to if you just didn't do anything, right?
When you first started that process, I would have to assume a decent amount of bias from the world around you kind of filled in at first, and you had to clean out that gunk and go, hey, who is actually John, not what's the latest TikTok thing or the latest influencer stating. Yes, no, and then advice on that for people is because I think so easy, right? If you're like, oh, I should start a business like John, or I should start a podcast like Devin, or I should, not be in the corporate ladder. It's like, no, like you could be a receptionist your whole life and be super fulfilled because what I actually love to do is something on the side. Maybe you love, racing cars and you're also a receptionist. Cool. So walk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's different too, right? I think that it's funny you say that because there's this guy on Instagram that's just blowing up right now by literally just recording. It's like he's a corporate dude. He's like basically talking about how it's okay to live a corporate life and still love your life. And so he's breaking the stigma of like, oh, you got to go start your business and you got to do this and this side hustle and that. It's like, no, like I live an amazing life and I love my corporate job. And so I'm going to document this journey. And it's like him pouring his coffee in the morning and driving to work in his Toyota. And it's like, it's super cool. And people like that because they know that it's possible to achieve happiness in a corporate job, for example. So I would say that as long as you can start with the foundation of what makes you tick, you can build something off of that. And so for myself, I knew that I had to be in the trenches trying to build something with a lot that takes a lot of trial and error. And so whether that was wholesaling, dialing 100 phone numbers every single day, or whether it was trading, trying to figure out how to mark up charts and understanding trend lines and all of that stuff, it was hard. And I really liked that aspect of it. But when it came to fulfillment and sustainability, it's like that could only last so long. What actually fulfills me is seeing the look on someone's face after they have a realization after thinking a certain way for 50 years. And then they realize a perspective or a mindset shift around an area where they're like, wow, this is possible and this is cool. And that I think is what fulfills me. And ultimately, people just need to find that within themselves. They need to say, what makes me happy and what can I create out of this thing that makes me happy? And it's a pretty logical conversation that you can have with yourself too. And it's a lot of people overlook it. A lot of people are okay living this life in corporate America, just hating their life because that's all they know.
Yeah, it's all they know and it's comfortable, but I think it's the internal reflection, right, that takes and admitting you're wrong. Because what's interesting is the podcast actually starting in Texas moving forward, we did a slight rebrand because it was the Do You Even Fail podcast, and it was underneath my graphic designer put the Business Failure podcast, which I was fine with at first. And also I noticed people came in just this one track mind, right? And then by episode 4, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, but why? I was like, there was the right purpose there. And what I realized is my joy is having very deep, emotional, passionate, challenging conversations with people that challenge my thinking, that make me grow. And I was like, I really just want to talk about life as a whole, right? So we're spinning off this more neon look. That's the Life Failure podcast. But I had to be willing to go, okay, I'm not satisfied. It's not anyone else's fault. It's mine. Why am I not? Where was I trying to go? How did I miss the target? And now how do I admit that, announce it publicly, and move forward? Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about proclaiming your change, not just keeping it to yourself. Because if you keep it to yourself, it doesn't become real. And then people also still think you're the old you. And so it's like, do you ever really get that freedom? I would say no, but I'd be curious your thoughts.
I think one of the biggest things that I've done recently on Instagram was I released my story of addiction and my past of not having my father in my life after 8 years old, and giving my testimony for why I was getting baptized. That one thing allowed me to fully step into this version of myself with confidence. And I was totally cool with having those conversations with anyone. I'm an open book when it comes to that stuff. But I never had the confidence to let the world know about it. And the second I did that, it opened up this whole new thing in my brain. It was like a new level of confidence. So the more you are secure in where you've been and what that's built to who you are right now, we can all realize that we all fail. We all have these things in our lives that we're not proud of. And that just makes you human. But what defines you is, what do you take from that? And how can you move forward in chasing the things that actually are creating that person that you are proud of? And we're not always going to be proud of those things. I'm not proud of the failures that I have, but I know that it's required in order to step into that true potential.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your thoughts. So you definitely, I like how you articulate that, hey, it's not something you're proud of, but you can take something from it. And earlier you articulated with failure that you never really see it as failure, but you see it as growth. And one thing I got pushed back a lot on was calling it the failure podcast, because people are like, hey, it's very negative. That's a bad connotation, right? It makes people feel less of themselves. And my pushback was, I think we live in a society where we don't do enough of that, where we don't go, hey, no, that I did fuck up. Like, that was bad.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't okay.
Not done that.
Yeah. And calling it for what it is, because I think by going, oh, it wasn't a failure, it was a mishap, and like, I'm changing, you don't truly take ownership. And if you don't take ownership, whatever you failed at, in my opinion, still has somewhat of a control over you. And so that's why I think you need to call it, you need to own up to it. You need to, acknowledge the ugly and then go to the good versus just ignoring the ugly. So the best way I would say to articulate that is, I was on LinkedIn. I had a debate with a guy where everyone was saying judging yourself is bad. And I said, negatively judging yourself is bad, but I 100% think we need to be judging ourselves daily. And that's the only way we can figure out where we did good, because you can judge yourself in a good way. Judging is not,
it's the word judge.
It's the word judge, yeah. So I'd be curious on you. I mean, you definitely seem like you do a lot of it. I'd be curious your thoughts on that take with failure and judging. And do you coach people to have that kind of introspective thought?
Totally. I love that question, man. I think that for myself, it's a dual-edged sword. I overthink a lot about how I am. And so I can go down some serious rabbit holes of judging myself, to where it does get to a point where it's not positive and it's actually hurting me. So there's a very fine line in that process for myself. But then on the flip side, there's people that will never acknowledge anything that they failed in, and they will give excuses to the reason why that didn't go their way. And that is what's unhealthy as well. So you can be unhealthy by overanalyzing every single thing, like I said, or it can be unhealthy by just giving excuses for why things may have not panned out the way you had wanted them to. I always tell my clients, what is one thing that you're not proud of, and where did you play a role in that? And so even if it's something like, for example, when I got fired from my tech job, I could have sat here and said, well, I got fired because they didn't give me this, or that, and this, so I couldn't do my job. Okay, what part did I play in that? I didn't do the work that I was supposed to do. I own that, and I need to own that with full security, because if I do not, I'm going to have that same excuse effect on all these other things in my life. And that's where it trickles down into all these other pillars. How you're showing up in friendships or relationships. Is it going to be half-assed, or is it going to be the blame mode where it's always on the other person? And so if we can't acknowledge where our part in that thing is, we're going to constantly be in that same cycle over and over again.
I really love how you articulate, hey, ask yourself where it was a bad situation you experienced and what your part was you played in it. And the reason I like that is I recently, it's probably not leveling up, but me, it felt like leveling up that concept where even if I was right, even if everything was in my favor, which it never is, we'll say 80% was, hey, Devin was right. And you and I got into a debate and things went sour. Even if 80%, hey, I was right, the world would look at it and go, nope, we take Devin's side. The thing I do now is I go, but you still were wrong because it escalated or went sour or went bad. So you still did something. Like you still need to take ownership, because if we believe as individuals that we're being really introspective and we do care about people and we do want to grow, then we should be learning, well, what did I do to trigger this situation, and put it on me, never on them, because I should be able to de-escalate it, bring it calm, and mellow it out. So that's something I'm working a lot on. It's like, hey, let's go even bigger and more challenging with that concept of how every interaction that ever goes sour, it's always you have a part. Never figure out what the other person did wrong. Who cares?
Right.
Well, just what did I do wrong?
Yep.
Just put it on me. So that's something I am working on. I'm sure you probably already kind of wrestle that way with yourself, but
Man, that's something every single day, dude. I mean, it can be as simple as like holding the door open for someone. Like, did I do enough today to feel comfortable with myself? Did I do a thing that was kind to someone? And then you can almost think like, okay, well, I'm playing a part in every aspect of my life. And so the more control we have over our own actions and our part in anything that we do, the less power we give away to other people, I always like to say, because we're confident in what our actions are. Even if they're not the right actions, we can still own it, which is then the learning example from that, if you decide to take it as the learning example at least.
do you think for people who are driven, who are probably listening to this podcast, are normally more driven and introspective, it's easy to turn what we're talking into a performance-based thing, right? Rather than I just actually want to better myself and make it a leisurely thing you do daily versus a stressful thing you do daily. Do you ever find yourself overly stressing about how you're showing up and how you're bettering yourself? Or have you done pretty good at, no, it's pretty chill, I just make it as part of my life?
I would say that's the one question out of this whole podcast that I battle with the most. I have this deep down insecurity of not being enough. So regardless of the accolades and all of the success and, doesn't matter how many people I help, I am always battling with this self-worth. And that happens. I have to check that every single day. I literally have to say, okay, you're doing good. Like, look at what you're doing. Look at what you're building. That's the evidence for your path of doing good in your self-worth. And so I have to constantly remind myself of being enough. And I think, a lot of people deal with that, especially when they're not doing the things that are building that confidence for themselves. So even if I am doing all of the right things, at the end of the day, I will still have that little voice deep down inside that says, no, it's not enough. It's not enough. You're not there yet, and you're never going to be there. And I think that I battle with that conversation because that can go down a bad path. You not being fully confident in the things that I've built, and that can be a negative feedback loop. But the more evidence I have to provide for me going in the right direction, it allows that voice to quiet down a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing you're hitting on, because I know for me, my whole childhood, sports, schooling, everything was always, if it was an A, why not an A+? If you took second, why not first? If you took first, why didn't you drop more time, right? And what I ended up finding out in my life is I became I have to bring value or I am of no value. So, and if value's just, hey, you enjoy talking to me, not good enough. Like, I need to bring tangible assets to the table. And over the last few years, I progressively got better at my career and everything I was doing. Those things actually got worse, right? And I ended up all of a sudden in a spot where I was sitting in my counselor's room a few weeks back, and she's like, so you're enough and you belong in every room you're in, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, right? Like, when you feel uncomfortable in counseling, you're like, yeah, sure. And this is so embarrassing to admit. But she's like, I want you to say it. I was like, huh? Yeah. And she's like, no, literally. I was like, no, I'm good. Like, this is weird. And in that moment, you're like, if it's that weird to say, that's where you're like, oh, man, like, this is a beast I need to keep wrestling, right? And I think more people don't admit it because it is a ugly truth that we think just being in a room with someone and enjoying their presence isn't good enough. And that is why I think there's such this pressure on society to perform. And I think you're finding the freedom and coaching people in the freedom. You don't need that. It's okay to just be in the room with someone.
Yeah, man, that's funny you mentioned that about sitting in your counselor's office. I had a very similar situation in terms of I am like literally she was like, say that you are enough for yourself. And I was like,
Right?
I'm like, I'm enough.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I got to figure this out here.
Yeah, right.
Like what's going on? And then once you start to peel back the layers and you really feel like, okay, what am I doing that builds those things? And then just using that as a focal point to continuously build on top of like, okay, what are the things that allows me to feel confident in saying that? Is it making a lot of money? Is it helping a lot of people? Is it, no, it's not any of those things. It's what is in alignment with my true value as a human being. Am I picking up the trash on the street? Am I holding the door open for the old lady that's, you know, going into the grocery store? Am I acting without negative energy as much as I can to society to then vibrate on a higher frequency? Those are the things that allows me to say, I am enough. I am worthy. Not the how many clients I have, not the how many people I've impacted. Yes, obviously that is a great thing and that's the mission that I'm on, which I'm doing, but that is not from inside of me. I got to make sure that I'm aligned inside to actually say those words in confidence. And a lot of the times it's hard because I battle with it every day. And so I just tell myself, you know, okay, what can you do? What's one thing you can do today that makes you feel aligned with your inner self?
Yeah, I always tell people if you remove everything exterior to you, is what left enough?
That's huge.
It's like if it's not,
That's huge.
like, and it's okay if it's not, but then you're allowing negative exterior things to drive you forward.
You know what? I think too, especially living in the world that we live in with social media, acknowledging the fact that it's everyone's highlight reel. People are scared to own their failures because of that reason. And I think that we are straying away from the actual development and personal growth by only showing our highlight reel, which I think is a lot of the reason why I got so much power in expressing that and sharing that testimony, because it was raw, it was vulnerable, it was me, and it wasn't pretty. It was the harsh reality of what my story is. And I think that a lot of people will naturally gravitate towards you because they are the same way.
Oh yeah.
They just are scared because Instagram is this highlight reel, and so they're scared it's not normalized to be human anymore.
I think what's even scarier, so I had a post the other day I put up and I titled it "Own Your Shit." Just like, I'm like, come on, people. But I think we've also normalized hiding or falsifying your reality. And what I mean is, look, if you're late to a meeting, how often do you just own why you're late? Like, it was an example I used. Like, how many of you are like, hey, like I had one meeting the other day I was late to. I was like, they're like, oh, you know, I was like, hey, sorry I'm late. I forgot I had this meeting. They're like, when I was like, oh no, I literally just was like, whoops, like treat you like you were important. My bad, right? And most people be like, oh, traffic or this.
Yeah.
But I think people do that all day long in all contexts, because whether they realize it or not, subconsciously they're trying to keep this front up. And it's like, hey, you want to feel not alone on an island, you actually want connections with humans, then you have to open up and show the truth of what you're living, right?
It's a beast.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of dedication to your own personal growth, which I think is very, very hard to find in people. And the only way you do it is by having those conversations with yourself. And that's one thing that I always like to preach as well, is pay very close attention to those conversations that you're having with yourself every single day, because that will be your reality. Even if you're not giving excuses to, like, verbalizing or vocalizing excuses to people around certain things, if you're giving them to yourself inside, having that conversation in there, man, it's going to be a rough road for you.
I think what's even scary is how many people don't have a conversation with themselves, right? I mean, I've sat in a room with people, it was probably about a year ago now, and we were just having a night talking about life, right? And one of my buddies brought up what he does in the car, usual conversation, right? Hey, you know, listen, because he's in sales, so he's driving all the time. He's like, oh, I listen to podcasts and this and that. He goes, hey, Devin, like, you used to drive a lot. And he goes, what did you do? I said, dude, I'm kind of weird. I'd sit like 3 hours in a car in silence and just drive and think. And he's like, what'd you think about it? I was like, a lot of things. But I was like, it was the most relaxed my brain had ever been, because now in my new role, I never drive. I'm always on. Like, it's 10 hours. My brain is just revving. And you're like, by the end, you're like, I'm mush. And someone in the room spoke up, and they go, hey, I don't like to sit in my thoughts because I don't like what they are. And I was like, even more reason to sit in them. I was like, go talk to someone with it. But that is my push in society, is like, sit in your thoughts. Like, my whole first 2 hours of my drive here from Dallas, I just sat in my thoughts. I was like, hey, it's been a crazy 72 hours. Like, let's just be. Let's just ride and let my brain process and think and force it. Don't just zone out. Like, start talking to yourself. Like, have those weird conversations. But
that's so true. I would say the 1% are comfortable with their own thoughts. And when I say comfortable, it doesn't mean that they're, because it's uncomfortable a lot of the times.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, one of the biggest things that always propels my day is taking 10 minutes in the morning when I wake up and just doing a quick 10-minute meditation. And when I started meditating, I was like, I'm not doing this right. Like, I don't think I'm doing this. I'm thinking about all these other things. And I'm like, oh, wait, that is meditating. It's allowing your mind to think and then realigning it with your breath. And then that whole practice is meditation. You're letting your mind just think, and you're listening to those thoughts. And the more I realized that I was doing the right thing, which again, it's like this ego thing. I'm like, oh, okay, so I have conviction now that I'm doing it the right way, so I can do it more. But the more I realized that I didn't label it as like, okay, like I'm doing it right or I'm wrong, I'm just being, and I'm just allowing whatever thoughts that come up to just come up. I can set those intentions throughout for the whole day. Just 10 minutes in the morning. Okay, what is my intention for the day? Where are my thoughts at right now? Recentering myself in those thoughts. It's crazy how much power that gives you for the rest of your day. And especially like a 2-hour drive.
Oh, yeah.
You go down some rabbit holes.
Yeah, you do. It's a fun time. So you talked about meditating, which I would say is a good, path off-roading into the fallacy world, right? And I'm for meditation, not throwing shade at it all. But in your space, I assume between fitness, career, and coaching people, you have to have seen some fallacies or people practice things that was a detriment that didn't actually provide value. If you had to pick one today that you're seeing a lot of that you're against, that you think isn't actually productive or doesn't actually better your life, what fallacy would you be jumping on?
You know what's funny about that question? I usually would have a quick answer for you, but I think the more the older I get, the more I learn about myself, the more open-minded I get towards certain things. For example, about 2 years ago, I went to a wellness retreat, and I had never done breath work in my entire life. And I went through an intense breath work session, and it was literally like a psychedelic trip.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, before walking in, I'm like, I would have told you, oh, breath work, I'm breathing every day. Like, that's not going to do anything. So I have judgment on things that I would have not necessarily known. And so through that experience, I've now opened my mind. Even if they're not things that I haven't done, I don't cross it off the list because I don't have proof in that myself. So I always say, like, I have to try it in order for me to judge it, to say if it works or it doesn't work. I've noticed that my intention behind all of these healing modalities, meditation, breath work, working out, cold plunging, that's been a new one for me, sauna, the intention, they all work. They all work for me. And the reason why is because I'm intentional about why I'm doing it. If I just sat in a sauna and I was on my phone scrolling on Instagram for 20 minutes and I was blocking my intention from why I'm actually sitting in that sauna, I may have not had the same benefits for if I was sitting in that sauna for 20 minutes in that meditational state where I'm thinking about all of these things and having all of these clarities. So I wouldn't say that there's one that I can bash on that I say doesn't work, because I think if it comes with intention, the more intention you have doing something, the more you can open your mind to doing it. And I've tried all of them and they all work for me because of that reason.
See, I would say I'd push back a little bit. And I would say throughout our conversation, there's definitely been, I would say, indirect poke at the fallacy that you can't have joy outside of a successful career, right? Like a lot of these guys you're talking to and gals are going, hey, hey, I got this next big client. I have this, I have this, I have this. And you're poking back going, hey, you can still be super successful here and still have a joy over here. And I would say a common fallacy today is you're doing this so you can enjoy your hobby one day. And you're going, nah, time out. Like, you can still enjoy the hobby, maybe not as much, not as often, but you can. So I'd be curious your thoughts on like that type of fallacy poke.
I think really since we're all different, it boils down to, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you working in the job that you're working? Why are you not prioritizing time with your family if that's what makes you happy? Why are the real reasons and so it could be a fallacy, but at the same time, there's reasons for every single person's circumstance. And the more inside you go with those reasons of why you're doing that thing, the more clarity you have on that to actually make a different decision. So the fallacy, I don't really believe it's a fallacy, because the more clarity you have within yourself, the more you can redirect the outcome of whatever you're doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say I want to align with things. I would say it's still a fallacy because you're choosing to believe that a formula results in something it doesn't. But I can see also, I think what you're poking on is the lack of realization that you're even in one. And I would say you don't feel fair poking at someone when they don't even realize that they're
Exactly.
in one.
Exactly.
That's fair. So while we're poking though, what are you going to leave? I mean, we've talked about a lot today. I normally like to list it off. I can't. I'm not going to pretend I'm
Right.
that smart. We've gone down a lot of good rabbit holes.
Yeah, we did.
And a lot of it's been focused, I would say, more on holistic internal reflection and how do you do that in a healthy state, and also how do you apply that to your life in a healthy manner, and how do you face failures and actually call it out for what it is, but also do something with it productive. And I think a great example of using things around you to help you get through that. I'm a huge fan of sauna and cold plunge. I do it 3 times a week.
Love it.
But if you had to challenge someone right now to change their thinking or change a habit, what are you going to leave with the audience?
Yeah, man. So short and simple, don't judge your thoughts and don't label your thoughts as good or bad. Lead with curiosity and understanding why it is a thought. And the more you can do that, the more awareness you have of what you're doing in your life and whether that's the good thing or the wrong thing.
So if I had to say it back, if I'm sitting in a chair, because usually, so I'm a 0 to 100 guy. If you ever get to know, I'm like, I'm all in or I'm not. And so I would say I used to do that a lot with my thoughts, where I just bucket it, right? Good, bad, go, run, move, left, right, versus taking the time to reflect on where it came from and why it's there. So are you challenging the audience to go, hey, don't necessarily think the thought's bad, because it might not be, because it's pointing to something greater, but you have to sit inside of it to understand it.
For example, if I'm working at a corporate job and I'm thinking, oh, this sucks. What sucks about it? So don't label that as a bad thing. What is this telling you about your circumstance? If you keep saying it sucks, your focus, your energy flows where your focus goes, right? So if you're not going to get a different result. So if you're labeling it sucks, nothing's going to change. But if you label it as, what is this showing me that I am not happy right here, right now, not labeling that as bad or good, it's just the way it is. Now you can make a logical decision moving forward for changing whatever you're trying to change.
Yeah, I definitely like that. I would say it's understanding you can be in a circumstance you don't like, but still gain fruit from it, right? Exactly. So it's like, hey, I don't like it. I know that now, so let's move on from that thought. What are we going to do in the interim? Because I still need the job, right? Got to pay bills.
Yep.
But what do I do about that? Is it even the job, or am I just unhappy in life in general, or what is it? So
yeah, and I think, to really sum it all up, it's going back to what I said, man. Pay very close attention to the conversations that you're having with yourself every day, because that's the reality that is going to come to fruition off of those conversations.
Yeah, that's the reality you live in, right?
Yep.
You don't realize it, but...
Totally.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.